It was supposed to be a quiet morning walk, until Max, Arthur Jenkins' golden retriever, pulled him beneath a stone bridge and toward a dying woman hidden in the shadows. But something didn't add up. Her face seemed hauntingly familiar, and when Arthur spotted the old silver locket at her neck, his world unraveled. Those who knew Arthur described him as kind but distant, a man who carried himself with quiet dignity while keeping the world at arm's length. At 73, the retired veteran had spent half a lifetime alone, his only companion, a golden retriever named Max, who padded faithfully by his side on their daily walks along Serenity River. Arthur's morning routine never varied. He rose with the sun, brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and sat at his kitchen table reading yesterday's newspaper while Max watched him with patient eyes. The modest house on Freret Street held few luxuries but was meticulously maintained. The military corners on his bedsheets, the precisely aligned photographs on the mantelpiece, the garden out back where everything grew in orderly rows. "Come on, boy," Arthur would say each morning, reaching for Max's leash. "Let's get some air." Their path always led them to Serenity River, a winding waterway that cut through Millfield like a silver ribbon. Arthur walked at a measured pace, his gait slightly uneven from an old war injury, while Max investigated every interesting scent with enthusiasm that never diminished regardless of how many times they'd walked this same route. Today, gold and crimson leaves spiraled down from the trees, creating a kaleidoscope of autumn colors along the riverbank. Arthur barely noticed. His mind, as it often did during these walks, had drifted back half a century to another autumn day, the last time he'd seen Amina. They had met when Arthur was 19, a boy really, working at his father's hardware store, before enlisting. Amina Peterson came in looking for garden shears, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, except for one stubborn strand that kept falling across her forehead. Arthur had forgotten how to speak for a full 30 seconds while she waited patiently at the counter. "The shears?" she'd prompted gently, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Right, yes, shears." He'd fumbled through the transaction, convinced he'd never see her again. But the next day she returned, claiming she needed twine. The day after that, it was a packet of nails. By the end of the week, Arthur had finally gathered the courage to ask her to the town dance, and to his astonishment, she'd said yes. Her laughter that night, the way her hand felt in his as they twirled beneath paper streamers in the high school gymnasium, these memories remained pristine despite the decades that had passed. It was the beginning of something both ordinary and miraculous, a small-town love story that should have stretched into children, grandchildren, peaceful old age together. The war changed everything. Arthur had enlisted out of duty, believing that the conflict would be brief. Amina, fiercely independent and determined to make a difference, trained as a nurse and volunteered for overseas service. They married quickly before deployment, a courthouse ceremony with only their parents as witnesses. Arthur gave her the silver forget-me-not locket the night before they shipped out. "So you won't forget me," he'd said, fastening it around her neck. She'd touched it reverently. "As if I could." For a time, they'd been lucky. Deployed to neighboring regions, they managed occasional reunions that sustained them through the horror surrounding. Arthur remembered the last one vividly, a brief 48-hour leave in a small village that had somehow escaped the bombing. They'd walked along a river not unlike this one, making plans for the future, choosing names for children they hoped to have once peace returned. 2 weeks later, Arthur received word that Amina's field hospital had taken a direct hit. There were few survivors. His Amina was listed among the missing, presumed dead. No body was ever recovered. No personal effects returned. Just a telegram and a flood of condolence letters that Arthur couldn't bring himself to read. He finished his tour mechanically, returned to Millfield, and built a life around the absence at its center. He took over his father's hardware store, expanded it, eventually sold it to a chain for a decent sum. He dated occasionally in the early years, but the relationships never progressed. How could they, when half his heart remained buried in foreign soil? "You've got to move on, son," his father had told him before passing away. "Amina wouldn't want you living like a ghost." Arthur knew this was true, but knowing and doing were different matters entirely. Instead, he'd found a middle path, a life of quiet purpose. He volunteered at the Veterans Center, maintained his home, and 5 years ago, adopted Max from the local shelter. The golden retriever, already middle-aged and overlooked by families wanting puppies, had gazed at Arthur with such understanding that the decision made itself. Now, as they approached the old stone bridge that marked the halfway point of their walk, Arthur found himself talking to Max as he often did when they were alone. 50 years today, boy," he said quietly. "Hard to believe it's been that long since I lost her." Max looked up at him with attentive brown eyes, as if he understood the significance of the date. Arthur sighed. "I still wonder sometimes, without a body. For years, I imagined she might have survived somehow. Ridiculous, I know. But the mind plays tricks when the heart doesn't want to accept reality." Max suddenly stopped, his body tensing. A low whine escaped his throat. "What is it, boy?" Arthur asked, scanning the area for whatever had caught the dog's attention. Max barked once, then began pulling insistently toward the shadowed area beneath the bridge. The leash went taut as the normally well-behaved dog strained against Arthur's grip. "Max, heel," Arthur commanded, but the retriever was uncharacteristically determined, continuing to pull while glancing back at Arthur with urgent eyes. Puzzled and slightly concerned, Arthur followed, the uneven ground challenging his stiff knee. As they ducked beneath the stone arch of the bridge, it took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the dimmer light. At first, he saw only a bundle of ragged blankets wedged against the stone wall, easily mistaken for discarded trash. Then the bundle moved slightly, and Arthur realized he was looking at a person. A wave of compassion washed over him. Homelessness wasn't common in Millfield, but it wasn't unheard of either. Arthur approached cautiously, not wanting to frighten whoever was sheltering here. "Hello?" he called softly. "Are you all right?" There was no response, but as he drew closer, he could see it was a woman. Her face was gaunt, her skin pallid with an unhealthy gray undertone. Her hair, matted and unwashed, appeared to be gray or perhaps light brown beneath the grime. She was clearly ill, her breathing shallow and labored. "Ma'am?" Arthur knelt beside her, his old joints protesting. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. A concerning rattle accompanied each breath. Arthur didn't hesitate. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket. With fingers that suddenly felt clumsy, he dialed 911. "Emergency services. What's your situation?" "There's a woman under the bridge at Serenity Park," Arthur explained, his voice steady despite his concern. "Near the north entrance. She's unconscious, breathing poorly. Looks like she's been living rough and is quite ill. An ambulance is being dispatched," the operator assured him. "Can you stay with her until they arrive?" "Of course," Arthur said. "I'm not going anywhere." After ending the call, he shrugged off his jacket despite the autumn chill and gently tucked it around the woman's shoulders. Max had settled beside her, his warm body pressed against her side, a low whine emanating from his throat. "Good boy," Arthur murmured. "You keep her warm." As he adjusted his jacket around her thin frame, something caught the weak sunlight filtering under the bridge, a glint of tarnished silver at her neck. Arthur leaned closer, peering at what appeared to be a necklace half hidden beneath the collar of her threadbare sweater. His heart seemed to stutter in his chest. With trembling fingers, he carefully drew out the pendant, a small, silver flower, its 5 petals forming a delicate circle around a tiny blue stone in the center. A forget-me-not. It couldn't be. It simply couldn't be. Yet here it was, the exact locket he had given Amina before they parted 50 years ago. Arthur felt dizzy, his vision tunneling as he stared at the tarnished piece of jewelry. He gently turned it over. There, on the back, were the tiny engraved initials he knew would be there. AJ plus EP. Arthur's mind raced through explanations. Perhaps Amina's personal effects had been recovered after all, the locket finding its way through second-hand shops to this unfortunate woman. Perhaps it was merely a similar design, the engraving a coincidence of matching initials. Perhaps his grief-stricken mind was seeing what he desperately wanted to see. Yet even as he cataloged these possibilities, Arthur found himself studying the woman's face with new intensity. Beneath the gauntness, the lines of hardship, the unhealthy pallor, could it possibly be Amina? He whispered, his voice cracking on the name he so rarely spoke aloud. There was no response, but Max whined again, nudging the woman's limp hand with his nose. In the distance, Arthur heard sirens approaching. Help was coming. He sat back on his heels, one hand still clutching the locket, the other pressing against his chest where his heart pounded painfully against his ribs. After 50 years of resignation, of learning to live with certainty of loss, Arthur Jenkins found himself facing a possibility so unlikely, so miraculous, that he dared not even form the thought completely. Instead, he waited beside the unconscious woman, his dog maintaining vigilant contact with her side, until the ambulance arrived and paramedics efficiently transferred her to a stretcher. "Are you family?" one of them asked as they prepared to load her into the vehicle. Arthur hesitated only briefly. "I'm all she has," he answered, which felt true regardless of who she turned out to be. They allowed him to ride along. Max reluctantly left with a neighbor Arthur called from the ambulance. As they sped toward Millfield General Hospital, Arthur watched the oxygen mask fog with each of the woman's shallow breaths, the silver locket now visible against the gray blanket covering her. "Hold on," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. "Just hold on." The emergency room was a flurry of efficient activity. Arthur found himself gently but firmly directed to a waiting area while the woman was whisked away behind swinging doors. He sat rigidly in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his mind cycling through the same impossible questions. None of it made sense. A young doctor eventually approached, clipboard in hand. "Sir, you came in with the Jane Doe found under the bridge?" Arthur nodded, rising stiffly to his feet. "How is she?" "Stabilized for now. She's suffering from pneumonia, malnutrition, and dehydration. We've started her on IV antibiotics and fluids. She's still unconscious, but her vitals are improving." The doctor hesitated. "May I ask your relationship to the patient?" Arthur's throat tightened. What could he say that wouldn't sound delusional? That he believed this homeless woman might be his wife, declared dead half a century ago. "I found her," he said simply. "I couldn't leave her alone." The doctor's expression softened slightly. "That's commendable. However, once she's stable, she'll likely be transferred to county services unless family can be located." "May I see her?" Arthur asked. After a moment's consideration, the doctor nodded. "Briefly, she needs rest, but having a friendly face nearby when she wakes might be helpful. Room 104, just down the hall." Arthur thanked him and made his way to the indicated room. He paused in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. The woman lay in the hospital bed, an IV in her arm, oxygen tubing across her face. Cleaned of dirt, her skin looked paper-thin, blue veins visible at her temples. Her hair, washed by a kind nurse, spread across the pillow. Not gray as he'd first thought, but a faded light brown with silver streaks throughout. He approached slowly, studying her features with desperate intensity. The shape of her nose, the curve of her jawline, the slight arch of her eyebrows, all vaguely familiar, yet altered by time and hardship. Arthur had carried Amina's image in his heart for 50 years, but it was the image of a young woman of 22, frozen in time while he himself aged. If this was truly Amina, she would be 72 now, marked by the same passage of decades that had turned his own hair white and lined his face. A chair stood beside the bed. Arthur lowered himself into it, his eyes never leaving her face. Gently, carefully, he reached for her hand. It felt small and cool in his grasp, the knuckles prominent, the skin paper-thin. Not the hand of the young nurse he remembered, but perhaps, "Amina?" he whispered. "Can you hear me?" There was no response, only the steady beep of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. Arthur didn't know how long he sat there, holding her hand, studying her face. Occasionally, a nurse would come in to check vitals or adjust medication, giving him sympathetic smiles but asking no questions. As afternoon faded into evening, he reluctantly recognized he needed to go home, to feed Max, to process what was happening, to decide what to do next. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised, gently placing her hand back on the blanket. "I'll bring a photo, something that might help us both understand." At home, Max greeted him with concerned enthusiasm, clearly sensing his emotional turmoil. Arthur moved through his evening routine mechanically, feeding Max, making a simple dinner for himself that he barely touched, sitting in his armchair staring at nothing while the television murmured unwatched in the background. Finally, he rose and went to the spare bedroom that served as his home office. The bottom drawer of the filing cabinet was locked. Arthur kept the key on his regular key ring, though he rarely opened this particular drawer. Tonight, he knelt before it with reverence and turned the small key. Inside were the mementos he allowed himself to revisit only on anniversaries. Their wedding photo, a handful of letters, the telegram informing him of Amina's presumed death, and at the back, a small velvet box containing the matching forget-me-not cufflinks Amina had given him before they deployed. He had worn them exactly once, on their wedding day, before carefully storing them away, too precious for everyday use. Beneath these items was a leather-bound photo album. Arthur lifted it out and carried it to the kitchen table where the light was better. Each page had been carefully arranged decades ago, a chronological testament to their brief time together. Arthur and Amina at the town dance, hiking in the mountains, their courthouse wedding, Amina radiant in a simple white dress, the silver locket gleaming at her throat. Arthur paused at this last image, studying it closely. The locket in the photograph was identical to the one the woman in the hospital wore. Not similar, identical, with its distinctive forget-me-not design and small blue center stone. With trembling hands, Arthur removed the wedding photograph from its corner mounts. He would take it to the hospital tomorrow, if there was even the slightest possibility. He slept poorly that night, his dreams a confused jumble of past and present. Dawn found him already awake, sitting at his kitchen window watching the sky lighten. As soon as visiting hours began, Arthur was back at the hospital. Max left reluctantly at home. The nurse at the station recognized him. "Room 104? She had a restful night. Still hasn't regained consciousness, but her numbers are improving." Arthur thanked her and made his way to the room. The woman appeared unchanged, still and pale against the white sheets, the silver locket now carefully placed on the bedside table by the hospital staff, along with the few other personal effects she'd had. A worn library card with no name, a smooth riverstone, a faded hair ribbon. He settled into the chair beside her bed, the wedding photograph held carefully in his lap. For a long time, he simply sat there, comparing the young, vibrant face in the photograph with the weathered, unconscious one before him. There were similarities, but were they merely the similarities any woman might share? Or were they proof of the miracle he hardly dared to hope for? "Mr. Jenkins?" A gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. A different doctor stood in the doorway, older than the one from emergency, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Dr. Sarah Williams. I've been assigned to your friend's case." Arthur stood, extending his hand. "Arthur Jenkins, thank you for caring for her." Dr. Williams shook his hand, then glanced at the bed. "The ER doctor mentioned you found her under a bridge but might have some connection to her." Arthur hesitated, then decided truth, however unlikely, was the only path forward. "Doctor, what I'm about to tell you will sound incredible, possibly delusional, but I ask that you hear me out." Dr. Williams nodded, her expression open. "Of course." Arthur held out the wedding photograph. 50 years ago, my wife, Amina, was a nurse serving overseas during the war. Her field hospital was hit. She was declared missing, presumed dead. No body was ever recovered. He swallowed hard. "Yesterday, when I found this woman, she was wearing this." He picked up the locket from the bedside table and opened it to show the doctor the engraved initials. "It's the exact locket I gave my wife before we were deployed. You can see it in this photograph." He pointed to the image of young Amina, the locket clearly visible at her throat. Dr. Williams looked from the photograph to the locket to the unconscious woman, her scientific mind clearly processing this improbable scenario. "Mr. Jenkins," she said carefully, "I understand why this would give you hope. The locket is certainly a remarkable coincidence, but after 50 years, and the trauma of war, you understand that the statistical probability is infinitesimal." Arthur finished for her. "I know. Believe me, I know how it sounds. But doctor, when there's even the slightest chance that this woman could be my Amina." Dr. Williams's expression softened. "I understand, and will certainly help determine her identity once she regains consciousness. In the meantime, would it be possible for you to bring in any additional photographs, preferably ones showing distinguishing features, birthmarks, scars, anything that might help with identification?" Arthur nodded eagerly. Yes, I have more at home." "Good." Dr. Williams made a note in the chart. "Also, be prepared that if this is indeed your wife, she may have experienced significant trauma. Memory loss, personality changes. 50 years is a long time, Mr. Jenkins." "I understand," Arthur said quietly. "I just need to know." After Dr. Williams left, Arthur resumed his vigil beside the bed. He spoke softly to the unconscious woman, not sure if she could hear him, but unable to contain the words that had been locked inside him for decades. "I looked for you, you know. After the telegram came, I couldn't accept it. I went to the embassy, the Red Cross, military records. No one had answers. Just missing, presumed dead, as if that was supposed to be enough." His voice broke slightly. "I wrote to survivors from your unit. Most never replied. Those who did had no information. It was like you vanished into thin air." He gently touched her hand, careful of the IV tube. "If you are my Amina, what happened to you? Where have you been all this time? Why didn't you come home to me?" The monitors beeped steadily. Outside the window, autumn leaves drifted past. Arthur continued talking, sharing details of his life over the past 50 years, the small-town changes, his friendship with Max, all the while studying her face for any sign of recognition or response. As afternoon approached, Arthur reluctantly prepared to leave. He needed to care for Max, and he wanted to find the additional photographs Dr. Williams had requested. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised, gently squeezing her hand before rising. "We have a lot of catching up to do, you and I." As he turned to go, he thought he felt the slightest pressure from her fingers against his. Arthur froze, his heart racing. "Amina?" he whispered, turning back. "Can you hear me?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then her eyelids fluttered, just slightly, before going still again. Arthur pressed the call button, and a nurse hurried in. "I think she moved," he explained, trying to keep his voice steady. Her hand squeezed mine, and her eyelids fluttered. The nurse checked the monitors, then gently lifted one of the woman's eyelids, shining a small light. "These are good signs. She's starting to respond to stimuli. The antibiotics are working on the infection." "Will she wake up soon?" Arthur asked. "It's hard to say," the nurse replied. "But movement and responsiveness are positive developments. Keep talking to her when you visit. Familiar voices can help guide patients back." Familiar. The word echoed in Arthur's mind as he drove home. Was his voice familiar to her? Or was he allowing hope to overrule reason, seeing connections where there were only coincidences? At home, Arthur went straight to the locked drawer again. This time, he removed every photograph he had of Amina, spreading them across the kitchen table while Max watched curiously from his bed in the corner. School pictures, candid snapshots, the few precious photographs they'd managed to take during their brief time together overseas. Arthur examined each one, looking for the distinctive features Dr. Williams had mentioned. In one, taken at a lake the summer before they deployed, Amina had her hair pulled up, revealing a small, crescent-shaped birthmark just behind her left ear. In another, her sleeve was rolled up, showing a thin white scar on her forearm from a childhood bicycle accident. These were the markers of Amina that time wouldn't have erased, unlike the softness of youth or the particular shade of her hair. Arthur selected these photographs along with several others, showing Amina from different angles. Tomorrow, he would bring them to Dr. Williams. Tomorrow, they might begin to unravel this mystery. That night, as he prepared for bed, Arthur found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He prayed. Not the rote prayers of his childhood, but a simple, heartfelt plea. "Please," he whispered to the quiet darkness, "please let it be her. And if it is, give me the strength to help her heal, wherever she's been, whatever she's endured. Let me be enough." The next morning, Arthur arrived at the hospital armed with a folder of photographs and renewed determination. The nurse at the station greeted him with encouraging news. She was awake briefly during the night, she told him, confused but responsive. "Dr. Williams has ordered some cognitive tests for later today." Arthur's heart leapt. Did she say anything? Give her name? The nurse shook her head. Just a few disoriented words. This is still progress, though. When Arthur entered room 104, he immediately noticed the change. Though still pale, the woman's face seemed to have more color. The oxygen tube had been replaced with a less invasive nasal cannula. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing appeared stronger, more regular. He settled into the chair beside her, placing the folder of photographs on the bedside table. For a few minutes, he simply sat in silence, gathering his thoughts. Then, gently, he took her hand in his. "Good morning," he said softly. "I hear you had a busy night." Decided to wake up and look around a bit. Her eyelids fluttered at the sound of his voice, though they didn't open. "I brought some photographs today," Arthur continued, keeping his tone conversational. "Old ones, from a long time ago. I thought they might help us figure things out." A slight furrow appeared between her brows, as if she were concentrating on his words. "My dog, Max, says hello. Well, not in so many words, but he's very concerned about you. Golden retrievers are empathetic that way. Maybe when you're feeling better, he can visit. The hospital sometimes allows therapy dogs." Arthur continued talking, sharing small details about his morning, the weather, anything to maintain the gentle flow of words that seemed to be reaching her on some level. He was mid-sentence, describing the maple tree in his front yard that had turned a brilliant red, when her eyes opened. They were blue-gray, clouded with confusion but undeniably conscious. She blinked slowly, her gaze drifting around the room before settling on Arthur's face. "Hello," he said gently, trying to control the tremor in his voice. "Welcome back." She stared at him, her expression unreadable. After a long moment, her lips parted. "Where?" The single word emerged as a rasp, her voice rusty from disuse. "You're in the hospital in Millfield," Arthur explained. "My dog and I found you under the bridge at Serenity Park. You were very ill." She processed this information slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. There was no spark of recognition, no sudden widening of eyes that would indicate she knew him. Instead, she looked wary, cautious, like someone accustomed to disappointment. "Water?" she whispered. Arthur quickly poured a small cup from the pitcher beside her bed and held it to her lips. She drank tentatively, then laid her head back against the pillow, clearly exhausted by even this small interaction. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes drifting closed again. "You're welcome," Arthur replied, carefully setting the cup aside. "Rest now. I'll be here." She seemed to slip back into sleep almost immediately, but her brief consciousness left Arthur both encouraged and troubled. She had shown no sign of recognizing him. But then, why would she? He was no longer the young soldier she had known. Time had transformed him as surely as it had changed her. Dr. Williams arrived an hour later, pleased to hear about the patient's brief period of consciousness. "This is excellent progress," she assured Arthur. "With cases of severe illness combined with possible long-term trauma, we often see a gradual return to full awareness." Arthur handed her the folder of photographs. "I brought these, as you suggested. There's a birthmark behind her left ear and a scar on her right forearm that would help with identification." Dr. Williams examined the photographs with interest. "These are very helpful. I'll check for these markers when I examine her." She glanced at Arthur, her expression compassionate but professional. "She might not remember me," Arthur finished. "Or herself." "Exactly. Trauma-induced amnesia is complex. Sometimes memories return fully, sometimes partially, sometimes not at all. And even if they do return, it can be a slow, disorienting process." Arthur nodded soberly. "I understand. If it is Amina, I just want to help her, regardless of what she remembers or doesn't." Dr. Williams smiled gently. "That's a healthy approach. Now, let me examine our patient." After what seemed an eternity, Dr. Williams emerged from the room and motioned Arthur to join her at the small consultation area near the nurse's station. "Mr. Jenkins," she began, her voice measured, "I've examined the patient and compared her physical markers with your photographs." Arthur held his breath. She does have a crescent-shaped birthmark behind her left ear, identical to the one in your photograph. And there is a thin scar on her right forearm, consistent with the one you identified. Arthur's vision seemed to blur at the edges. So it's her? It's really Amina? Dr. Williams held up a cautioning hand. These physical markers strongly suggest this could indeed be your wife. However, I want to be clear that her mental state is fragile. When she woke again during my examination, she was disoriented and uncertain of her own identity. She didn't recognize your name when I mentioned it. Arthur's heart sank. She doesn't remember me. She may not currently remember herself, Dr. Williams corrected gently. When I asked her name, she hesitated, then said she wasn't sure, but people lately had called her Eleanor. She couldn't tell me her last name or her age. Eleanor, Arthur repeated. That's so close to Amina. Yes, which might suggest fragments of memory persisting even through significant trauma. I've ordered a psychological consultation and some cognitive tests. In the meantime, I suggest you continue visiting and talking with her, but avoid overwhelming her with expectations or too much information at once. Arthur nodded, trying to absorb all the implications. What do I call her? Amina? Eleanor? For now, perhaps ask her what she prefers, Dr. Williams suggested. Give her agency in this process. It's important she doesn't feel pressured to be someone she may not remember being. After Dr. Williams left, Arthur took a few moments to compose himself before returning to room 104. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Elation that the physical markers matched. Devastation that she didn't seem to remember him or her own identity. Fear about what traumas she must have endured to reach this point. And beneath it all, a tentative, fragile hope. When he re-entered the room, she was awake, her gaze turned toward the window where afternoon light streamed in. Hearing his footsteps, she turned, studying him with the same cautious expression as before. "You came back?" she said, her voice slightly stronger than earlier. "I did," Arthur replied, reclaiming the chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" She considered the question carefully, as if physical sensation were something she needed to analyze. "Less foggy. Still weak. That's progress," Arthur encouraged. "The doctor says you're improving." She nodded slightly, then looked down at her hands resting on the blanket, the hospital ID bracelet loose around her thin wrist. "She asked me questions I couldn't answer." "That's all right," Arthur said gently. "You've been very ill. Things will become clearer with time." She looked up at him, her blue-gray eyes searching his face. "You know me," she said. It wasn't a question. Arthur hesitated, remembering Dr. Williams' advice not to overwhelm her. "I believe I do," he said carefully. "But what matters right now is your recovery. The doctor said you found me." Her speech was slow, deliberate, as if each word required concentration. "You and your dog." "Yes, Max, that's my dog. He actually found you. Led me right to you under the bridge." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I'd like to thank him sometime." "You will," Arthur promised. "When you're stronger." He paused, then gently asked, "What would you like me to call you?" "The doctor mentioned you told her people have been calling you Eleanor." She frowned slightly. It never felt quite right, but it was close to something that felt more real. Her fingers drifted up to her throat, automatically seeking the locket that now lay on the bedside table. Not finding it, her expression turned anxious. "It's right here," Arthur said quickly, picking up the locket and offering it to her. "They removed it while you were being treated, but it's safe." She accepted it with visible relief, her fingers closing around the silver forget-me, not with familiarity. "This is important," she murmured. "I don't remember why, but I know it is." Arthur's heart ached to tell her everything, about the day he'd given it to her, about their love, their separation, the 50 years of emptiness between then and now. Instead, he simply said, "It's a forget-me, not flower, a symbol of remembrance and fidelity." She traced the outline of the petals with one finger. "Forget-me, not," she repeated softly. Something flickered in her eyes, a momentary spark of recognition. There and gone so quickly, Arthur wasn't sure he'd seen it at all. "Would you like me to help you put it back on?" he offered. She nodded. With careful movements, Arthur fastened the delicate chain around her neck, acutely aware of the paper-thin skin at her nape, the vulnerability of her bowed head. The locket settled against her hospital gown, and she touched it once more, as if confirming its presence. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. This time, her gaze lingered on his face with new intensity, as if trying to place him in some half-remembered context. "What's your name?" "Arthur," he replied. "Arthur Jenkins." She repeated it, testing the sound. "Arthur Jenkins." Then, unexpectedly, "You have kind eyes." The simple observation, so honest and direct, caught Arthur off guard. He felt a flush of emotion rise in his chest. "Thank you," he managed. A nurse entered with medication, interrupting the moment. "Time for your antibiotics," she announced cheerfully. "And some dinner will be arriving soon. You need to build your strength." While the nurse adjusted the IV, Arthur rose from his chair. "I should let you rest and eat, but I'll come back tomorrow. if that's all right. She looked at him, still with that searching gaze, and nodded. I'd like that. As Arthur turned to leave, she spoke again, her voice hesitant. Arthur? The locket, does it open? He paused in the doorway. Yes, there's a small catch on the side. She nodded thoughtfully. I never could figure out how to open it. Thank you. This small revelation, that she had carried the locket for who knew how long without knowing its secret, struck Arthur profoundly. How many other secrets lay locked away in her mind, waiting for the right touch to release them? The next week fell into a pattern. Arthur would arrive at the hospital mid-morning, bringing fresh flowers or small treats approved by the medical staff. Sometimes he found her sleeping, other times awake and gazing out the window, and occasionally working with a physical therapist or psychiatrist. Her strength improved steadily. The pneumonia responded well to antibiotics, and proper nutrition began to restore some vitality to her thin frame. Her mental state remained fragmented, however. She knew how to read, how to perform basic tasks, and demonstrated intelligence and comprehension, but her personal history remained largely a blank. It's like looking through fogged glass, she explained to Arthur one afternoon as she sat up in bed, picking at a bowl of gel. Oh, I can see shapes, movements, but nothing clear, nothing I can name. Does anything feel familiar? Arthur asked. Any particular memories that seem stronger than others? She considered this, absently touching the locket that now never left her neck. Water, she said finally. Running water. A river, I think. Not the one where you found me, but similar. And honeysuckle. The smell of honeysuckle makes me feel safe. Arthur's heart quickened. The river where they had walked on their last day together had been lined with honeysuckle bushes. He had often commented that the scent reminded him of her hair. That's good, he said, keeping his voice neutral despite his excitement. Sensory memories, sounds, smells, often return first. She nodded, then looked at him directly. And you, she added, your voice. Sometimes when you're talking, I close my eyes, and it feels like coming home. Arthur swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in his throat. That's good to hear. I'm sorry I don't remember more, she said, misinterpreting his emotion for disappointment. The doctors say it might come back in pieces, or all at once, or not at all, Arthur finished gently. I know, and it's all right. Whatever happens, whatever you remember or don't, I'm just glad you're here, getting better. She smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her face, making her look momentarily younger, more like the Amina of his memories. The nurses say I'm their miracle patient. They didn't expect me to recover so quickly. You always were stubborn, Arthur said without thinking. Her smile faltered slightly. Was I? Arthur backtracked quickly. I mean, you seem determined, a fighter. She accepted this with a nod, though her expression remained thoughtful. After a moment, she asked, could you bring your dog someday? Max? The hospital director approved a visit, since I'm doing better. Of course, Arthur said, relieved by the change of subject. He'd love to meet you properly. He's been very concerned about his rescue project. This earned another smile. Thank him for finding me. I don't remember much about being under that bridge, but I remember being cold. So cold. I think I might have been giving up. The quiet admission hung in the air between them. Arthur reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past week. Well, I'm very glad Max is nosy and stubborn, he said, squeezing her fingers gently, and that he has a good sense of direction. The next day, Arthur brought Max to the hospital. The golden retriever, usually exuberant, seemed to understand the need for decorum. He walked sedately beside Arthur through the hallways, his tail wagging gently but his manner calm. When they entered room 104, she was sitting up in a chair by the window, wearing a hospital-issued robe over her gown. Her hair had been washed and combed, falling in soft waves to her shoulders, more silver than brown in the sunlight. At the sight of Max, her face lit up. Hello, hero, she said, extending a hand toward the dog. Max approached her carefully, sniffing her offered fingers. Then, to Arthur's amazement, the dog placed his head directly in her lap, looking up at her with soulful brown eyes. He remembers you, Arthur said, surprised by the dog's behavior. Or he knows I need a friend, she replied, gently stroking Max's golden head. Thank you for finding me, good boy. Max's tail thumped against the floor in obvious contentment. I had a dream last night, she said suddenly, her hand still moving rhythmically over Max's fur. About a dance. There were paper streamers hanging from the ceiling, and a band playing something slow. I was wearing a blue dress, and someone was holding me close. I couldn't see his face, but I felt happy, safe. Arthur's breath caught. Their first dance. Amina had worn a cornflower blue dress that brought out her eyes. The high school gym had been decorated with crepe paper streamers for the spring formal. That sounds like a good dream, he said carefully. It felt like a memory, she replied, looking up at him. But then, dreams often do, don't they? Before Arthur could respond, Dr. Williams entered the room, smiling at the sight of Max. "I see our therapy dog has arrived," she said. "How are you feeling today, Eleanor?" The woman hesitated, then said quietly, "I don't think that's my name." Dr. Williams raised an eyebrow. "Oh, have you remembered something different?" "Not exactly remembered," she said slowly. "It just doesn't feel right. When I hear it, it's like wearing someone else's shoes." "Almost correct, but not quite." Dr. Williams nodded understandingly. "That's actually a positive sign. Your sense of self is becoming clearer, even if specific memories haven't returned yet." She glanced at Arthur, then back to her patient. "Would you like me to call you something else in the meantime, until you remember?" The woman's hand moved to the locket at her throat, a gesture that had become habitual. "The flower," she said. "The one on the necklace. What's it called again?" Forget me. Not," Arthur supplied. "No, not the English name. I think there was another name for it." Arthur searched his memory. "Amina," he said softly. "You once told me that your grandmother called them Amina in her native language." Her eyes widened, her hand tightening on the locket. "Amina," she repeated, the name falling from her lips like a recovered treasure. "Amina." A tear slipped down her cheek. "That's it. That's my name." The moment hung suspended in the sunlit room, Max's head still resting trustingly in her lap, Dr. Williams watching with professional interest but obvious compassion, and Arthur, hardly daring to breathe, witnessing the first real step of Amina's return to herself. "Well then, Amina," Dr. Williams said gently, "it's very nice to meet you properly." Amina smiled through her tears, one hand still stroking Max's fur, the other clutching the silver forget-me, not that had carried her name through 50 lost years. "It's nice to meet me too," she whispered. The recognition of her name marked a turning point in Amina's recovery. Though she still couldn't remember most of her past, accepting her true name seemed to anchor her more firmly in the present. Her physical health continued to improve, and after 2 weeks in the hospital, Dr. Williams began discussing discharge plans. Normally in a case like this, with no clear identity documentation and ongoing memory issues, we would coordinate with social services for temporary placement, Dr. Williams explained during a meeting with both Arthur and Amina. However, given the circumstances, "I want her to come home with me," Arthur said firmly. He turned to Amina. "If that's what you want too, of course. I have a spare room. It would be safe, comfortable, and Max would be delighted." Amina looked uncertain. "You've already done so much. I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden," Arthur replied, perhaps too fervently. Catching himself, he added more moderately, "It would be my privilege to help you continue your recovery, but only if you're comfortable with the arrangement." Dr. Williams observed their interaction with thoughtful eyes. "Amina, how do you feel about this option? You should know that there are alternatives if you prefer more independence." Amina's fingers found the locket again, her touchstone. "Arthur feels familiar, safe." She looked at him directly. "I don't have many clear memories, but I know we have a connection. I can feel it, and I'd like to understand what it is." Dr. Williams nodded. "I believe this arrangement could be beneficial for your continued recovery, especially as it might help trigger more memory returns. However, I'd like to schedule regular follow-up appointments, both medical and psychological." "Of course," Arthur agreed immediately. "Whatever she needs." The day of Amina's discharge arrived bright and clear, the autumn colors at their peak. Arthur had spent the previous days preparing the spare room, making it as comfortable and welcoming as possible. He'd purchased new bedding, placed fresh flowers on the nightstand, and ensured the adjoining bathroom was stocked with everything she might need. When he arrived at the hospital with a small suitcase of clothing he'd bought for her, guessing at sizes, hoping for the best, Amina was sitting on the edge of her bed, dressed in the hospital-provided outfit given to patients without their own clothes. The silver locket gleamed against the plain blue top. "Ready to go home?" Arthur asked, setting the suitcase beside her. Amina looked up, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Home," she repeated softly. "That's a word I haven't had much use for in a long time, I think." "Well, it's yours now for as long as you want it," Arthur assured her. A nurse arrived with a wheelchair, hospital policy for all discharges. Amina submitted to the procedure with good grace, though Arthur could tell she was stronger now, perfectly capable of walking. As they made their way through the hospital corridors, she looked around with keen interest, as if seeing everything properly for the first time. Outside, the October air was crisp and invigorating. Amina tilted her face up to the sun, closing her eyes briefly to savor the sensation. "It feels different," she said as Arthur helped her into his car. "Being outside as a person with a name, with somewhere to go, not just surviving." Arthur finished for her when she trailed off. She nodded, looking at him with those searching eyes that seemed to see more each day. "Yes, exactly." The drive to Arthur's home took only 15 minutes, but for Amina, it was clearly a journey of discovery. She watched the town pass by with fascination, the small shops along Main Street, the park with its walking paths, the old library with its Greek revival columns. Millfield, she murmured. I think I've been here before. A long time ago. Arthur's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You have, he confirmed simply. When they pulled into the driveway of his modest two-story house, Max appeared at the front window, his face pressed against the glass, tail visibly wagging even from a distance. Someone's excited to see you, Arthur commented with a smile. Amina laughed, a sound Arthur hadn't heard since her return, light and genuine, like wind chimes. He's a good friend already. Inside, Max greeted them with controlled enthusiasm, clearly remembering his hospital manners. Amina knelt to properly thank him, receiving doggy kisses with obvious delight. Arthur watched, his heart full. Seeing her in his home, interacting with Max as if she belonged there, which she did, more than she yet knew, felt like a dream he feared waking from. Let me show you around, he said when she stood again. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable. The tour was brief. Living room with its well-worn furniture and bookshelves, kitchen with the breakfast nook overlooking the backyard, his study that doubled as a home office, and finally, the spare room that would be hers. Oh, Amina said softly as she stepped inside. It's lovely. Arthur had chosen colors he hoped might trigger memory. The bedspread was a soft blue reminiscent of the dress she'd worn to their first dance, the curtains a shade that complemented the forget-me-not locket. Fresh flowers, no honeysuckle available this late in the year, but lavender and late-blooming asters stood in a simple vase on the nightstand. The bathroom is through there, Arthur explained, indicating a door. I put some basic toiletries in, but we can get whatever else you need. And those clothes might not fit perfectly, but they'll do until we can shop for more. Amina touched the bedspread, then the flowers, her movements deliberate, as if cataloging sensations. Thank you, she said, turning to him, for all of this. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. There's nothing to repay, Arthur assured her. I'll let you settle in. Take all the time you need. I'll be in the kitchen when you're ready. He left her to explore her new space in privacy, returning to the kitchen where he busied himself preparing lunch, soup, and sandwiches. Simple but nourishing. Max followed him, clearly torn between his usual spot in the kitchen and his desire to stay with their new houseguest. She'll be out soon, Arthur told the dog, and she's staying, so you'll have plenty of time with her. Almost on cue, Amina appeared in the doorway. She had changed into some of the clothes Arthur had purchased, a pair of soft gray pants and a sweater in a gentle blue that brought out her eyes. Her hair was brushed, and she had applied a touch of the tinted lip balm he'd included in the toiletries. Something smells wonderful, she said. Just soup and sandwiches, Arthur replied, oddly nervous now that they were alone together in his home. Nothing fancy. After hospital food, home cooking will taste like a feast. She approached the counter. Can I help? Arthur directed her to the silverware drawer, and they fell into an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm, moving around the kitchen together as if they'd done it countless times before, which, Arthur reflected, they had, just 50 years earlier, in a different kitchen, in what sometimes felt like a different life entirely. Over lunch, they talked easily about small things, the weather, the changing leaves, Max's obvious contentment having both of them at the table. Arthur was careful not to press for memories or overwhelm her with information about their shared past. Dr. Williams had emphasized the importance of letting Amina's memory return naturally, at its own pace. After they ate, Amina insisted on helping with the dishes despite Arthur's protests. As they stood side by side at the sink, she washing while he dried, she suddenly paused, her hands still in the soapy water. I've done this before, she said quietly. With you, haven't I? Arthur carefully set down the plate he was drying. Yes, he confirmed. A long time ago. She nodded slowly, then resumed washing. I can't see it clearly, but my hands remember the motion, and something about standing here with you feels practiced, familiar. They finished the dishes in companionable silence, each lost in thought. Afterward, noting that Amina looked tired despite her determination not to show it, Arthur suggested she might want to rest. The doctor said not to overdo things on your first day home, he reminded her. Maybe a nap? Max usually takes one in the afternoon. He'd probably appreciate the company. As if on cue, Max gave a tremendous yawn, making Amina laugh again. Well, if Max insists, she said. Perhaps just a short rest. Arthur watched as she made her way back to her room, Max trotting happily alongside her. Once they were out of sight, he sank into a kitchen chair, overcome by the surrealism of the situation. The afternoon passed quietly. Arthur called Dr. Williams to report that Amina had settled in well, then spent some time in his study reviewing the follow-up appointments and medication schedule. When he checked on Amina around 4 o'clock, he found her and Max both sound asleep on the bed, the dog curled protectively against her side. He withdrew silently, not wanting to disturb their rest. They ate dinner early, a simple casserole Arthur had prepared the day before. Amina seemed more relaxed after her nap, asking questions about the house, about Millfield, occasionally about Arthur himself. He answered carefully, providing context without pushing too hard toward their shared history. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Amina browsed the bookshelves while Arthur built a small fire in the fireplace, the October evening having turned chilly. Max settled on his customary rug before the hearth, sighing contentedly. "You have a lot of history books," Amina observed, running her fingers along the spines. "And poetry. I've always enjoyed reading," Arthur replied. "Feel free to borrow anything that interests you." She selected a volume of poetry and brought it to the armchair opposite Arthur's. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, Amina reading, Arthur pretending to read but mostly watching her over the top of his book, Max dozing by the fire. It felt so domestic, so right, that Arthur's chest ached with the perfection of it. When Amina yawned for the third time in as many minutes, Arthur gently suggested it might be time to turn in. "It's been a big day," he said, "and there's no rush. We have time." She nodded, carefully marking her place in the poetry book before setting it aside. "Yes, time." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Arthur, may I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied immediately. "The locket," she said, touching it at her throat. "You gave it to me, didn't you? Before whatever happened that separated us." Arthur swallowed hard. "Yes, I did." "Were we?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Were we important to each other?" The simple question, so profound in its implications, nearly undid him. "Yes," Arthur said softly. "We were very important to each other." Amina nodded, as if confirming something she had already suspected. "I thought so. I can feel it, even if I can't remember it clearly." She rose from her chair. "Good night, Arthur. Thank you for bringing me home." "Good night, Amina," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Sleep well." He remained by the fire long after she had gone, staring into the flames, remembering, hoping. Max eventually abandoned his rug to come rest his head on Arthur's knee, offering silent comfort. "She's finding her way back, Max," Arthur whispered, stroking the dog's golden head, one step at a time. The days fell into a gentle routine. Mornings began with coffee at the kitchen table, watching birds at the feeder outside the window. Amina grew stronger each day, taking short walks with Arthur and Max around the neighborhood, gradually extending their range. The autumn colors peaked and began to fade, leaves carpeting the ground in russet and gold. Memory returned in fragments, often triggered by unexpected things. The smell of cinnamon in Arthur's coffee, a certain slant of light through the kitchen window, the sound of a train whistle in the distance. Amina would pause, her expression distant, then share whatever piece had surfaced. "I remember a hardware store," she said one morning as they washed breakfast dishes. "Glass jars of nails and screws along one wall, the sound of a bell when the door opened." Arthur's hand stilled on the towel. "My father's store. I worked there before enlisting. That's where we met." Amina smiled, the memory becoming clearer as she spoke. "I came in looking for garden shears. You couldn't stop staring at me. You were the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen," Arthur said simply. I could hardly string two words together. These moments of connection happened more frequently as days turned into weeks. Sometimes the memories were small, the name of her childhood dog, her favorite flavor of ice cream. Other times they were more significant, her training as a nurse, fragments of their courtship, the day he gave her the locket. "It was before we shipped out," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, her fingers tracing the silver petals of the forget-me-not. "You were so serious when you gave it to me, as if you were already afraid of what might happen." "I was," Arthur admitted. "War makes you acutely aware of how fragile life is, how quickly everything you care about can be taken away." Amina looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "But I didn't forget you. Even when I forgot myself, I kept this. Somehow, I knew it mattered." Not all the memories were pleasant. Sometimes Amina woke in the night, crying out from nightmares she couldn't fully articulate when awake. Arthur would hear her through the wall that separated their rooms, and Max would whine at his bedroom door, desperate to go to her. After the third such night, Arthur gave the dog permission to sleep in Amina's room. After that, the nightmares seemed less frequent, less intense. Dr. Williams continued to monitor Amina's progress through weekly appointments. After the first month, she expressed cautious optimism. "The rate of memory return is remarkable," she told Arthur after one session while Amina was changing. "It's as if her mind was waiting for the right environment, the right prompts, to begin healing." "Will she remember everything?" Arthur asked, the question that had haunted him since the beginning. Dr. Williams' expression turned thoughtful. "It's impossible to predict. Some patients with trauma-induced amnesia recover most of their memories over time. Others retain permanent gaps, particularly around the traumatic events themselves." She placed a hand on Arthur's arm. "But I want you to understand something important. Even if she doesn't recover every memory, that doesn't mean she can't build a meaningful life moving forward. Memory is only part of who we are." Arthur nodded, understanding the gentle warning beneath the doctor's words. Amina might never fully return to being the woman he had lost 50 years ago. He needed to accept her as she was now, a blend of past and present, familiar and new. The most significant breakthrough came on a snowy December afternoon, nearly 2 months after Amina had come to live with Arthur. They had walked to the town library, Amina now strong enough for the mile-long trek each way, Max trotting happily alongside them. The first snow of the season had begun falling as they browsed the shelves, and by the time they emerged, the world was transformed into a winter wonderland. "It's beautiful," Amina said, tilting her face up to catch snowflakes on her cheeks, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. Arthur watched her, struck as always by how such simple pleasures seemed to delight her. In some ways, her amnesia had given her this gift, the ability to experience life with fresh wonder, unburdened by the weight of too many years. They walked home slowly, enjoying the hush that snow brought to the world. As they approached the old stone bridge near Serenity River, the place where Max had found Amina that fateful October day, she suddenly stopped. "Arthur," she said, her voice strange, "I need to see it, where Max found me." "Are you sure?" Arthur asked, concerned. "It might be upsetting." "I'm sure," she replied firmly. "I need to understand, to see where one life ended and another began." Reluctantly, Arthur led her down the sloping bank to the area beneath the bridge. Max followed, unusually subdued, as if he too remembered the significance of this place. The space under the bridge was sheltered from the snow, the ground hard and cold, the stone walls damp with moisture. Amina stood silently, looking at the spot where she had lain dying just 2 months earlier. Her hand found the locket at her throat, a gesture Arthur now recognized as her way of grounding herself when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. "I remember bits of it," she said finally. "The cold, the hunger, the sense that I was fading and feeling almost relieved about it." She turned to Arthur, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was so tired of not knowing who I was, of drifting from place to place, carrying only this locket and the certainty that I had lost something precious." Arthur reached for her gloved hand, and she took it, holding on tightly. "I want to remember what happened, Arthur. All of it. How I became lost. Where I've been all these years. I need to understand." "It might come back in time," Arthur said gently. "Dr. Williams says." "I know what Dr. Williams says," Amina interrupted, an edge of frustration in her voice. "But I'm tired of fragments, of pieces that don't fit together. I want my life back. All of it." As if in response to her vehemence, Max suddenly barked, a sharp, alert sound that echoed under the bridge. Both Arthur and Amina turned to look at him. The dog was staring at something in the water's edge, partially hidden by stones. Curious, Arthur approached, Amina following. Wedged between 2 rocks was a small, battered canvas bag, the kind used by hikers to keep valuables dry. It was dirty and weathered, but the waterproof seal appeared intact. "That's mine," Amina said immediately. "I remember it. I kept it with me always. But that last night, I was so ill, so confused. I must have dropped it." With fingers made clumsy by cold and anticipation, Arthur retrieved the bag and handed it to her. Amina took it reverently, turning it over in her hands. "Should we open it here?" Arthur asked. "Or wait until we're home?" Amina hesitated, then looked up at the thickening snow. "Home," she decided. "This feels important. I want to be somewhere warm, somewhere safe." The walk back seemed to take both forever and no time at all. Neither spoke, both preoccupied with thoughts of what the bag might contain. Even Max seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, staying close to Amina's side rather than investigating the fascinating new scents the snow had brought. Once inside, they removed wet coats and boots. Amina carefully placed the canvas bag on the kitchen table, then stood looking at it, suddenly hesitant. "What if it doesn't help?" she whispered. "What if it only raises more questions?" Arthur moved to stand beside her. "Then we'll face those questions together," he said. "But Amina, whatever's in that bag, whatever you remember or don't, it doesn't change who you are now. It doesn't change." He paused, almost saying us, before catching himself. "It doesn't change the progress you've made." She nodded, drawing strength from his words. With deliberate movements, she untied the weatherproof closure and opened the bag. Inside were several items wrapped in a plastic grocery bag for additional protection. A small notebook with a weathered leather cover, a few folded documents, and a photograph in a simple frame. Amina removed the photograph first, her hands shaking slightly. It showed a young couple. Arthur immediately recognized himself at 22, in uniform, standing beside a radiant Amina on their wedding day. The same photograph he had shown Dr. Williams 2 months earlier. "Our wedding day," Amina whispered, running a finger over the image. "The courthouse. Your parents were there, and my mother. My father had already passed." She looked up at Arthur, her eyes wide. "Arthur, we were married." "Yes," he confirmed softly, "just before we deployed." Amina set the photograph down carefully and reached for the documents. Unfolding them revealed her military nurse certification, their marriage license, and what appeared to be medical discharge papers. Though these were damaged by water, parts of the text illegible. Finally, she opened the notebook. The first pages contained neat, dated entries, a journal Amina had kept during her deployment. Arthur watched as she turned the pages slowly, reading her own words from 50 years earlier, occasionally nodding as if confirming something she had begun to remember. About halfway through, the handwriting changed, becoming more erratic, the entries shorter and less coherent. The final pages contained no dates, just fragmented thoughts and recurring phrases. Must find Arthur. Remember Arthur. Forget me not. When she reached the last entry, Amina closed the book and looked up, tears streaming down her face. I remember, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not everything, but enough. The hospital, the explosion, waking up somewhere I didn't recognize, with people speaking a language I didn't understand, the head injury. Arthur moved closer, wanting to comfort her but unsure if he should interrupt this crucial moment of recollection. They told me later I was found in the ruins, unconscious, no identification except my wedding ring, which someone stole while I was still unconscious, Amina continued. When I woke, I couldn't remember my name, where I was from, anything except fragments. And your face. I remembered your face and the locket, though I couldn't remember how to open it. She touched the forget-me, not at her throat. For years, I drifted, from hospitals to refugee camps to wherever the aid workers sent me. Sometimes I'd have flashes of memory, your name, pieces of our life together. I'd write them down, try to make sense of them, but then the memories would slip away again, like trying to hold water in my hands. Arthur could no longer keep his distance. He pulled out a chair beside her and sat, taking her cold hands in his. You never made it onto any survivor lists, he said. I looked for you, for years. I was registered under different names in different places, Amina explained. Whatever I could remember at the time, or names given to me by well-meaning aid workers. Eleanor was the last one. A nurse in a shelter in Chicago thought it sounded right when I told her I thought my name started with L. How did you end up back in Millfield? Arthur asked, the question that had puzzled him since finding her. Amina's brow furrowed in concentration. About a year ago, I found an old newspaper in a shelter. There was a small article about Millfield's sesquicentennial celebration. Something about it triggered a memory. I knew I had to go there. I made my way slowly, working odd jobs when I could, hitchhiking sometimes. By the time I reached Millfield, I was exhausted, ill. I had just enough clarity to find the river. I remembered it was important somehow, and then, nothing until waking in the hospital with you beside me. Arthur fought back his own tears. To think of her wandering for decades, struggling to remember, making her way back through sheer determination and fragments of memory, it was almost unbearable. Amina, he said, his voice breaking on her name. If I had known, if there had been any sign you were alive, you would have moved heaven and earth to find me, she finished for him, squeezing his hands. I know that, Arthur. I've always known it, even when I couldn't remember your name. That's why I kept the locket, why I never gave up trying to find my way back. Max, sensing the emotional atmosphere, moved to press against Amina's leg, offering his steady, uncomplicated support. She released one of Arthur's hands to stroke the dog's golden head. And now? Arthur asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Now that you remember more of who you were, what you lost. Amina looked at him directly, her blue-gray eyes clear and certain. Now I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. It took 50 years, Arthur, but I found my way home. The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet conviction, broke something open in Arthur's heart, a last reserve of caution, or of fear that this miracle might somehow still be snatched away. He drew Amina into his arms, holding her as he had dreamed of doing every day since losing her, and she melted against him, her head finding the perfect resting place against his shoulder. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Millfield in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, before the witness of a golden retriever whose instincts had bridged 50 years of separation, Arthur and Amina began the delicate, precious work of building a future neither had dared to imagine possible. Winter settled over Millfield like a benediction, hushing the world beneath snow and early twilights. For Arthur and Amina, it became a season of quiet rediscovery. With the canvas bag's contents providing anchors for her returning memories, Amina found herself remembering more each day, sometimes in sudden floods of recollection that left her breathless, other times in gentle waves that arrived with familiar scents or sounds. I remember our first Christmas together, she said one evening as they decorated the small pine tree Arthur had brought home. We had a tiny apartment near the base. The tree was just a tabletop one, but you insisted on real candles, even though they were a fire hazard. Arthur laughed, handing her another ornament. I was determined to be romantic, nearly burned the place down when one candle tipped over. But you caught it in time, Amina continued, the memory clarifying as she spoke. And afterward, We made hot chocolate and opened our gifts. I gave you a fountain pen engraved with your initials. I still have it, Arthur said softly. In my desk drawer. I kept everything. Such moments of connection became the framework of their new life together. Each remembered detail was celebrated, each gap in memory acknowledged without judgment. Dr. Williams continued to monitor Amina's progress, expressing amazement at the extent of her recovery. The human brain is remarkably resilient, she told them during a checkup in January. But I've rarely seen a case where memory has returned so comprehensively after such a long period of amnesia. I believe your journal and photographs provided critical memory anchors. But equally important has been the emotional security of your current environment. She smiled warmly at both of them. In other words, being home with Arthur and Max has given your brain the safety it needed to begin healing old traumas. As winter deepened, they established new routines alongside the rediscovered old ones. Mornings still began with coffee at the kitchen table, but now included a shared reading of the newspaper. Amina, particularly interested in world events she had missed or experienced only peripherally during her years of wandering. Afternoons often found them walking with Max along snow-covered paths, Amina gaining strength and stamina with each passing week. Evenings were perhaps the most precious, quiet hours by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes reading companionably. Max stretched out between them on the hearthrug. Slowly, Amina filled in the gaps of her 50 lost years, sharing what she could remember of hospitals, refugee camps, shelters, the series of temporary identities and locations that had defined her life. The strangest part, she told Arthur one night, was always feeling like I belonged somewhere else, with someone else. Even when I couldn't remember your name or face clearly, I knew someone was waiting, someone was missing me. Arthur's heart ached at the thought of those decades, himself in Millfield, building a solitary life around her absence. Amina adrift in the world, carrying only the locket and fractured memories of what she had lost. But we found each other again, he said, reaching across to take her hand. Against all odds, thanks to Max, Amina added, smiling at the dog who lifted his head at the sound of his name. Our own personal miracle worker. As winter gave way to early spring, changes subtle but significant marked their evolving relationship. Amina moved with increasing confidence around Arthur's home. No longer a guest, but a partner in the space they shared. The spare room became truly hers, decorated with treasures found on their walks or small purchases from the town's shops. She began cooking some meals, her hands remembering skills her mind had temporarily forgotten, filling the house with aromas that triggered more memories for both of them. Physical closeness developed naturally, without rush or pressure. A hand on a shoulder while passing in the kitchen, sitting closer on the sofa during evening reading. The first time Arthur kissed her, just a gentle touch of lips to her forehead as he said goodnight, seemed both momentous and as natural as breathing. I've fallen in love with you twice in one lifetime, Amina told him a few days later as they prepared dinner together. Once as a girl of 20, and now again as a woman of 72. How many people get that chance? Arthur had to turn away briefly, overcome by emotion. When he could trust his voice again, he said simply, I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Spring arrived in earnest, crocuses pushing through melting snow, birdsong returning to the mornings. On the first truly warm day in April, they walked to Serenity River, Max bounding ahead with the enthusiasm of a much younger dog. The path took them over the stone bridge where their reunion had begun 6 months earlier. Amina paused mid-span, looking down at the water flowing beneath, ice-free now and sparkling in the sunlight. I want to see what's on the other side, she said. Arthur understood immediately that she meant more than just the physical path ahead. Are you sure? We don't have to. I'm sure, she said firmly. I need to see it all, to close the circle. They crossed the bridge and continued along the path until it opened into a clearing dominated by an ancient willow tree, its branches just beginning to green with new leaves. Amina stopped, her hand tightening on Arthur's arm. This is it, she whispered. This is where you gave me the locket. The day before we shipped out. Arthur nodded, memories of that day washing over him. Their picnic on a blanket beneath the willow, the dappled sunlight through the branches, the weight of the small silver locket in his pocket as he waited for the right moment. You said that forget-me-nots symbolized true love and memories that endure, Amina continued, her voice gaining strength as the memory clarified. You made me promise to come back to you, and you promised the same. And you did, Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. It took 50 years, but you kept your promise. Amina turned to face him fully, the April sunlight catching in her silver-streaked hair, her blue-gray eyes clear and certain. I love you, Arthur Jenkins. I loved you then, and I love you now, perhaps even more deeply for having lost and found you again. The directness of her declaration left Arthur momentarily speechless. In the months since her return, they had carefully rebuilt trust and connection, acknowledging their shared past while creating a new present. They had expressed affection, certainly, but neither had spoken those precise words, perhaps both wary of rushing what fate had so miraculously restored. "I love you too," Arthur finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Always have, always will." Max, who had been exploring the clearing, returned to sit beside them, looking up expectantly, as if awaiting the conclusion of a story he somehow understood. "Good boy," Amina said, kneeling to ruffle his golden fur. "You found me when I didn't even know I was lost. What do you think we should do now?" As if in answer, Max gave a single, decisive bark, then looked back and forth between them, tail sweeping the new spring grass. Arthur laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in decades. "I think that's a vote for moving forward together," he said, offering Amina his hand to help her rise. She took it, but instead of immediately standing, she remained kneeling, still holding his hand. "I have a better idea," she said, her eyes suddenly twinkling with mischief. "Arthur Jenkins, will you marry me?" Again? Arthur stared at her in astonishment, then burst into delighted laughter. "Amina Peterson Jenkins, are you proposing to me beneath our willow tree?" "I am," she confirmed, her expression both playful and earnest. "We're different people now than we were 50 years ago. I think we deserve a fresh start, a new ceremony to mark this chapter of our story." Arthur felt his heart swell with joy so intense it was almost painful. Without hesitation, he lowered himself to one knee beside her, ignoring the protest of his aging joints. "Yes," he said simply, 1,000 times. "Yes." Max, apparently approving of this development, circled them excitedly, his tail a golden blur of happiness. They were married again on a perfect day in May, beneath the willow tree by Serenity River. It was a small gathering. Dr. Williams and her husband, a few friends Arthur had made over the years, the librarian who had helped Amina research the gaps in world events she had missed, and of course, Max, sporting a blue bow tie for the occasion. Arthur wore a simple dark suit with forget-me-not cufflinks, the ones Amina had given him before they deployed, preserved for 50 years in their velvet box. Amina wore a knee-length dress in periwinkle blue, her silver-streaked hair arranged in soft waves, the silver locket gleaming at her throat. The town judge who performed the ceremony had been briefly confused by their request, given that their original marriage license from 50 years earlier was still valid. "Technically, you're already married," he had explained. "We know," Arthur had replied, "but we've been separated for 50 years by circumstances beyond our control. We want to renew our vows, to acknowledge that while we're the same people who made those promises, we're also changed by time and experience." The judge, touched by their story, had agreed, creating a ceremony that honored both their enduring past and their reclaimed future. "Love that survives separation, trauma, and the passage of decades is not common," he said as Arthur and Amina stood before him, hands joined beneath the willow's gentle canopy. "It reminds us that what binds human hearts together transcends time and circumstance. It gives us hope that connections once thought lost may yet be restored." When they exchanged rings, simple bands inscribed with their initials and the dates of both ceremonies, 50 years apart, there wasn't a dry eye among the small gathering of witnesses. Max, sensing the emotional significance of the moment, sat perfectly still beside them, his brown eyes solemn and attentive. "By the authority vested in me, I am honored to pronounce that you are, once again and still, husband and wife," the judge concluded. "A love twice pledged is surely blessed." The small reception was held in Arthur's backyard, now their backyard, spring flowers blooming in the beds Amina had begun tending, laughter and conversation flowing as easily as the champagne. As dusk fell, twinkling lights strung in the trees created a magical atmosphere, a celebration not just of their reunion and remarriage, but of resilience, of hope sustained against impossible odds. Later, after the guests had departed, Arthur and Amina sat together on the porch swing, watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering darkness. Max dozed at their feet, exhausted from the excitement of the day. "Happy?" Arthur asked, his arm around Amina's shoulders, her head resting against him. "Beyond words," she replied, her hand finding his, wedding bands touching. "I keep thinking about all the coincidences, all the small miracles that had to align for us to find each other again. If Max hadn't been so insistent that day, if you hadn't been walking by the bridge, maybe it wasn't coincidence," Arthur suggested. "Maybe some connections are simply meant to endure, no matter what stands in their way." Amina considered this, her fingers absently stroking the silver "forget-me" knot at her throat. "I still have gaps," she said after a moment. "Periods of time I can't account for, memories that haven't returned, but I've made peace with that. The important things have come back. You, our life together, who I was, and who I want to be now." "And who is that?" Arthur asked gently. "Who do you want to be now?" Amina smiled, the expression illuminated by the soft porch light. "Arthur Jenkins' wife, Max's co-parent." A woman who knows the value of each day because she's lost so many. A gardener, perhaps. I find I enjoy coaxing things to grow and bloom. She turned to look at him directly. And who do you want to be, now that you're no longer a solitary man with a dog and memories? Arthur didn't need to consider his answer. Exactly who I am at this moment. A man who has been given a second chance at the life he always wanted. A husband who gets to fall asleep beside his wife and wake up next to her each morning. A caretaker of memories, both the ones we've recovered and the new ones we're creating every day. Fireflies danced in the darkness beyond the porch, their intermittent lights, like stars brought down to earth. Max stirred at their feet, repositioning himself with a contented sigh. From somewhere distant came the sound of the river, flowing steadily on its eternal journey to the sea. I think, Amina said softly, that we have been extraordinarily blessed, not just in finding each other again, but in having the time and capacity to appreciate the miracle of it. Arthur tightened his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. Many couples get decades together, but they take them for granted. We never will. Every day is precious because we know exactly what it means to lose those days. To lose them and then, against all odds, to find them again, Amina added. As night deepened around them, they remained on the porch swing, two figures silhouetted against the warm light from inside their home, the golden shape of a loyal dog at their feet. Their story, extraordinary in its twists and turns, in its separation and reunion, had found its way to a place of peace and completion. Not an ending, Arthur reflected as he felt Amina's breathing slow into the gentle rhythm of sleep against his shoulder, but a continuation. A new chapter in a love story that had refused to be finished, that had endured through war and loss, through decades of separation, through the fog of forgotten identity, a love story that had found its way home. We invite you to share your stories in the comments below. Every story of connection lost and found reminds us that hope is never wasted, that love leaves indelible marks on our hearts that time cannot erase. If you found Arthur and Amina's journey moving, please consider subscribing to our channel for more extraordinary tales of fate's unexpected twists. And remember, sometimes the most unlikely companions, like a golden retriever named Max, become the bridges that connect our broken paths, leading us home when we've forgotten the way.